Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends, because I have a phenomenal guest coming on. I have John Solomon from Just the News. He's what we would call an actual real journalist. John, welcome back to the program. How are you?
Yeah, good to be with you, Nick. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, and it's always a pleasure. Now, I have to get your take on Bloodbath 2024.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Listen, since Russia collusion in 2016, the mainstream media, often working with their allies in the Democratic Party or the Democratic administration or the Democratic administrative state and government, they continue to take things out of context to drive a narrative. They have a narrative, and then they try to fit facts into that narrative so that they can sustain the narrative. And most Americans realize that what Donald Trump said this weekend was he was referring to what would happen to the auto industry if there was another 4 years of pro-China Biden policies. He wasn't talking about an insurrection. He wasn't talking about contesting the election. The bloodbath comment was clearly in, if we don't stop the Biden policies by electing me, that it was going to have a significant effect on the future of the auto worker in America. And despite that, the media went with it. They've doubled and tripled down on it, even as President Trump made clear what his comments meant. I think the greatest liability that the news media has today, and the reason they're losing so many readers, traditional news media losing so many readers, is they keep assuming that the American public is stupid, that they can be hoodwinked. But I think that is their greatest liability, the media. Americans are very perceptive. They hear this stuff, they go check it out, they realize, hey, I'm being lied to by CNN, I'm being lied to by the Washington Post, I'm being lied to by the New York Times. And I think increasingly people are turning away from the legacy media to new sources of information like your podcast, my website, because they realize for the last 8 years, but mostly in the era of Donald Trump, the news media has not only failed to tell us the truth, sometimes they've actually intentionally told us mistruths.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And how damaging do you think this is? Like, when it comes to Russia and Russiagate, the media always played it off like, well, we were just being told from the government officials and we were just running with it. Same thing with the whole Russian bounty story. But this one's different, because if you just listen to the 15-second audio clip of the entire paragraph, you see what the clear intent was. Do you think that this is something that the media could come back from, or do you think that they pushed a little too far on this one?
Well, listen, I think you're starting to see that the media sees its job to defeat Donald Trump. Before, it was to tell stories from their favorite sources that if they reflected negatively on Donald Trump, that'd be okay. But now it seems as though, and we've had several columnists and newspaper writers across this country say they think it is their job to stop Donald Trump. I think in this episode, there isn't a government official telling him what to report. There is an overt biased attempt by news media reporters to turn the quote into something it never was. And I think that is a very hard thing to overcome. Once you cross that threshold, once you declare, I've decided that no matter what your common sense, what the intellect, what the facts say, I'm going to try to persuade you otherwise, people begin to lose interest in checking those sites. Most Americans like to get the facts, make up their own mind. Don't tell me how to make up my mind. Let me make up my own mind with facts. And too often, and in this episode particularly acute, there is a sense of the media trying to force you to make them come to your side. You have to believe us or you're deplorable. You have to believe us, and that's what Donald Trump meant. And I think that that's wearing on the American public. These episodes are cumulative, right? The Hunter Biden laptop, the Russia disinformation, some of the stuff we now learned about January 6th and Cassidy Hutchinson. I think the cumulative effect is people don't take NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post nearly as seriously as they did 4 or 5 years ago. And there's a little polling data point that I think is really, from my perspective, a ground-shaking fact. So there's not been any effort by the mainstream media, the legacy media, to cover the Hunter Biden story seriously or thoroughly. or as aggressively as they've covered every issue about Donald Trump. And, 3-4 years ago, that had an effect. Only about 20% of people in 2019, when I first started writing my Hunter Biden stories, thought that Joe Biden did anything wrong, and that they were mostly Republicans. Today, in the AP NORC poll that came out a couple of weeks ago, 67%, I always forget the number, but almost 2/3 of Americans believe that Joe Biden did something illegal or unethical. Now, they didn't get that from the New York Times. They didn't get that from the Washington Post. They didn't get that from the major networks or CNN. It tells you that people are now beginning to absorb truth and facts from places other than the mainstream media, predominantly because the mainstream media has burned the American public so much. And so that data point, that polling data point that came out a couple of weeks ago, a very powerful sign that maybe the media landscape is changing and maybe changing forever.
John, we got to take a quick break, but when we get back, I want to piggyback off that for a minute because Just the News just broke some stories, and that's where you find real news. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, John, you just broke a story on Just the News about Cassidy Hutchinson, her January 6th testimony, and her lawyer. Can you just tell the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of important things. First off, we last week were able to get from the good work of Chairman Barry Loudermilk, the House Administration Oversight Subcommittee Chairman, that the January 6th committee, particularly Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson, were in possession of significant evidence showing that one of the most sensational stories they imposed on the American public, first at a hearing, then in their final report, was that Cassidy Hutchinson said that Donald Trump lunged for the steering wheel in his presidential limo and tried to hijack his own limo to take it to the Capitol on January 6th, and then he may have even assaulted Secret Service personnel. Now, to tell that story credibly, to try to sell that to the American people, remember, Cassidy Hutchinson didn't witness this. He didn't even hear it firsthand. She heard it thirdhand. So they tried to sell a third-hand hearsay account to the American people. In the meantime, they kept from the American people several first-hand accounts, people who were in the limousine. All of them, including the Secret Service driver, said what Cassidy Hutchinson said never happened. Donald Trump didn't grab the steering wheel. He didn't lunge for the people. He didn't assault anyone. He did ask to go to the Capitol, and when we said we didn't have a security plan, he said, all right, let's go back to the White House. What a difference. But for 2.5 years, because the Democrats suppressed the first-hand account, they misled the people with the third-hand account. Similarly,
I just want to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah.
It was clear that they had this information from the Secret Service agents long before it just came out last week that it was all made up.
Yeah, and we've seen this time and again in the January 6th. And again, this is another example where, at least in Congress, using tax dollars, our money, your and my money, we pay for Congress, we fund Congress. They were trying to mislead the American people. And yeah, a lot of people would say that. They were trying to mislead the American people. They were trying to create the illusion of truth when there wasn't any truth there. And similarly, this morning, there was allegations filed against Cassidy Hutchinson's lawyer, Stefan Passantino, alleging that he did all these terrible things when he represented her. The two bars, one in Georgia, the disciplinary bar in Georgia, the disciplinary bar in D.C., both concluded they couldn't find any evidence to substantiate the allegations that the January 6th committee, their allies, and Cassidy Hutchinson herself leveled against Passantino. That is a real concern, that they could create the illusion of some sort of wrongdoing when, in fact, it didn't exist when you actually looked at the facts. You have the media doing it, you have the administrative state doing it in the government bureaucracy, and then you have now at least Democrats in Congress doing that. And by the time the American people catch up to the truth, 2, maybe 3 years have passed. It's a frustrating cycle, and I think Americans likely will be thinking about this cycle and how many times they've been duped when they go to the polls in November. I think this is on the ballot in November, along with illegal immigration and the world aflame and inflation and all of it's done to our household budgets. I think the idea that your government and their allies have been lying to you, censoring you, blocking you from the truth, I think it's a part of what's going to drive people to make decisions in November.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really disgraceful when you have government officials that are knowingly manipulating information to try and control how Americans think. And then you have a media that actually encourages it and pushes the government narrative. And there's also disputes about whether Trump, encouraged 10 to 20,000 National Guard troops Democrats in the J6 committee said, no, that's not true. What do you know about that?
Well, first off, the very first document that ever surfaced in that debate came out of Just the News about 2.5 years ago. It was a actual Capitol Police record. It wasn't one that the January 6th committee made public. It's one that we got from sources. It was a timeline of all the events that occurred leading up to January 6th and afterwards. It showed a lot of intelligence failures and security failures. It showed that Capitol Police were being told by the FBI, the Homeland Security Department, the Marshal Service, the District of Columbia Police Department, and Homeland Security that there was a high propensity for violence to occur that day, that the type of people that were talking of coming there were talking about causing trouble, like targeting lawmakers in the tunnels around the Capitol, like storming the Capitol, like confronting Democrats or anyone who would not delay the certification of the vote. So they knew something bad was happening and they didn't adjust their security plan accordingly. That timeline showed that early on January 3rd, so 3 full days in advance of the actual event where the tragedies occurred, there was a call. The Trump Pentagon called the Capitol Police and said, hey, would you like some National Guard? The president said, make it available to you. If you do, just send us a request. And the police said, let's check into it. And they came back a little while later and said, no, thank you, we're good. Well, that was the first sign that what Donald Trump had said was true. It was actually memorialized in a record. Then I interviewed Chris Miller, and I found some testimony in the Inspector General's report from Mark Milley. All of them said, we were in a meeting with Donald Trump, and he said, make whatever National Guard available, give them whatever they need to keep the place secure. Still, the Democrats said, nope, that didn't happen. It wasn't true. We didn't do it. Well, finally, this past week, the White House Deputy Chief of Operations, the guy that basically set the plan for that day and quarterbacked all the communications, his testimony, which again wasn't released by the January 6th committee because it would have conflicted with one of their findings, said absolutely, the president said, offer the troops and have them, and if they need 10,000, they get them up to 10,000. If they need more, send more. Not only did that conversation occur on the 3rd, but according to this deputy chief of White House operations, Tony Ornato, the next day he sat in a meeting with government officials and they discussed the 10,000 figure specifically. The January 6th committee, the Liz Cheneys and the Benny Thompsons of the world, kept that information from the American public and then concluded to the opposite, even though there was far more factual evidence affirming what the president said, that he had authorized the 10,000 troops, than there was anything suggesting he hadn't. This is, again, an example through omission and commission. Democrats in Congress using your tax dollars and my tax dollars misled the American people. The facts are very clear now, but we were kept from them from 2.5 or 3 years.
There's a lot of things that actually concern me about the January 6th committee, a lot of stuff that we don't know. And that's what I want to talk to you when we get back from a quick break, John. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, John, you brought up Congressman Loudermilk, and I want to talk to you about that because he came out and said that there's a lot of documents that are missing, maybe some have been destroyed, that there's testimony that's behind passwords that they don't have access to, and evidence behind passwords they don't have access to. How widespread is this? And even more concerning is, how much is there that we don't know that hasn't been released to the public?
There's still a significant gap. Now, in fairness, Chairman Loudermilk has closed that gap quite a bit in the last year, using the power of subpoena and using the power of compelling witnesses, going on his own to find documents that Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney couldn't help him find. And he's beginning to unravel the story, like the Tony Ornato thing, like the Secret Service driver. But there are still, the majority of the videotapes that were made are missing. Large numbers of transcripts are missing. Large amounts of correspondence that the committee had at various times is missing. And I think that that is very troubling. And one of the places where we don't have a lot of visibility yet is, what was the Biden White House doing to try to encourage Congress, the Justice Department, and the Georgia prosecutors to sick the full weight of the U.S. government and the full weight of the Georgia government to prosecute Donald Trump for alleged crimes that occurred on January 6th. The idea that the Biden White House would be in the middle of those conversations would be 30 years ago anathema. We say, oh, that doesn't happen after Nixon, after Watergate. But in fact, there is pretty clear evidence that the White House has been directly involved in the planning of prosecutions, in the planning of the congressional hearings, literally using their resources to go after their chief political opponent. I think that's an area we're going to make some significant progress this spring and summer. I know Chairman Loudermilk's looking for the evidence. I've sued to get some of the evidence. I've already gotten one document, which is a National Archives document that shows it was the Biden White House in the form of Joe Biden's White House counsel that told the National Archives sick the FBI on Donald Trump when it comes to the classified documents case. That's an extraordinary thing. If it was the other way around, oh my God, there'd be days and days of headlines in the Washington Post. But when it's this way, the Washington Post has stood silent. But the White House was involved in sicking the FBI on Donald Trump by instructing the National Archives to do its work. We now know from the testimony in the Fani Willis soap opera, if I could call it that for a second, Days of Our Lives or Days of Our Prosecutorial Love Lives. I don't know what that one's going to be called, but at the end of the day, there is clear evidence that Nathan Wade billed for a couple of meetings where he said he met with White House officials and in court. In a little notice hearing that we discovered, Fani Willis acknowledged that there were two documents that clearly included communications from the White House to Fani Willis and the Georgia prosecutors. The White House doesn't belong in any of these prosecutorial discussions. And that doesn't mean just the Biden White House. It's just not appropriate for any White House to lay on prosecutors or have some influence. Now, if they're being investigated or they're asked for information, that's different. But inserting themselves into it would be unprecedented in modern American history. So we're suing to get those records.
And hopefully you get those records, because we know if it was the roles were reversed, I could already see the headline: authoritarian targeting his political opponent, the next Mussolini.
No doubt.
You know.
And by the way, that would be inappropriate. Listen, I think that's the right reaction, no matter who the president is. The fact is, it's Joe Biden in this case, and there is no curiosity, no outrage, no reporting going on, except for what you and I are talking about, what I'm doing with America First Legal. That is not right. The media used to be a legitimate watchdog, and today they have seemed to have let that go by the wayside. I'll give you a great example of something that has always intrigued me, and it's coming out this afternoon, so we're going to get a sense of it. There's been all this discussion that Hunter Biden's business partner did Joe Biden's taxes and did all of his accounting and paperwork when he was the vice president. So he essentially had a financial advisor and a tax accountant, a facilitator for his financial transactions. I've been asking for 2 years, how did he get paid? Did Joe Biden pay him? Was that a free gift? Because, by the way, that guy got Eric Schwerin, he got a presidential appointment. And I thought, well, the guy that does the president's taxes gets a presidential appointment. Did the president or vice president at that time, Joe Biden, ever pay the guy? And no one in the media even dared to ask that question. But today we are going to learn from the release of Eric Schwerin's testimony that Eric Schwerin did all of that accounting work, for preparation of taxes, preparation of ethics reports, something that costs thousands of dollars for you and I for each one of those sort of tasks. Joe Biden didn't pay a nickel for it. He got it for free. And then at the end, after he got all that free help, what did Joe Biden do? Well, he appointed this guy to a plum presidential commission. In any other presidency, that would be an outrage. That would be an ethics scandal of epic proportions. But the media hasn't asked a darn thing about it in 2.5 years when it first became obvious that Eric Schwerin was doing work for the president while also being paid by Hunter Biden. Another thing I think we'll learn from Eric Schwerin today, the business partner of Hunter Biden. Remember when Joe Biden said, the money I got from my brother was a repayment for the loan, and the brother said, I don't have any paperwork for loans. Eric Schwerin said, I never saw any money leave Joe Biden's accounts to go to James Biden. I don't know of any loans that went that way. I only know of the money that came back in. Well, maybe Joe Biden has been lying to us about that as well. Again, zero curiosity from the legacy media. And I think that's what frustrates Americans. If the shoe was any other foot and these were Donald Trump questions, there'd be breathless breaking news alerts across your screen on every major television network.
Yeah, it amazes me. The over a dozen shell companies, all these different loans that Joe Biden's given out on a Senate salary and a vice presidential salary. It's stunning. But Joe Biden comes from the old days where you had the party bosses and there was patronage. That's right. So it seems like he's operating
the Delaware machinery.
Yeah. But another thing that you broke that hasn't been discussed really in the legacy media at all is the connection to China, the nuclear power plants, and Hunter Biden and the Biden family business. Explain that one.
It's so important to realize that what Hunter Biden was doing when he was dealing with the company CEFC China was he was trying to transfer the energy-rich resources of America to one of our largest geopolitical strategists. The first stories I wrote on this 2.5 years ago, which the Washington Post eventually, in credit to them, did do some work on, involved getting natural gas assets. So Joe Biden doesn't want us to drill on our land and take our gas and give it to the American people so that maybe their energy prices can come down. But his son was perfectly comfortable getting those same energy assets, those same energy technologies like fracking or an LNG plant in Louisiana called Monkey Island, and giving it to the communist Chinese. He was okay with that. That was the first leg of CEFC. But more recently, we learned from digging and reporting and talking to people that Hunter Biden and his business partners also worked on a plan to take the crown jewel of the American nuclear reactor community, Westinghouse. It had developed this new reactor called the AP1000 that was the envy of the world about a decade ago. It was the smallest, most powerful reactor. It meant that future nuclear power plants could be much smaller in footprint, much smaller in need of water and other things. It was the envy of the entire world. Our American ingenuity developed this incredible technology. Westinghouse had licensed some of it to China to say, hey, you could use it, but China wanted to own it. And Hunter Biden and his business partners wrote these documents up saying, hey, we're going to help you through cutouts. You can't do it directly. We'll do it through cutouts. You'll end up buying Westinghouse through this hop and this hop. And then once you own Westinghouse, you will control, that's the word they use, control the nuclear energy market for decades to come. You would have a monopoly or a monopolistic position in the global markets. Again, we developed it here in America. It's American ingenuity, what Westinghouse did. Hunter Biden felt it was okay to go ahead and just work on some sort of secret deal that would send that to the communist Chinese hands and to the detriment or future negative position of the American public. And this goes on and on and on. I have one other story that kind of tracks like this. Joe Biden's Justice Department, when he was vice president, he oversaw Ukraine policy. In 2014, the Obama-Biden Justice Department indicted a Ukrainian oligarch who they deemed to be corrupt. Not the one that was paying Hunter Biden money to be on the Burisma board. That's a different oligarch. It turns out Hunter Biden had multiple oligarchs that were his friends or his clients, I should say.
Well, now, how do you get connected to all these oligarchs? That's what I want to know. I mean, we all know Hunter
I feel
Biden's
really deprived. Yeah. Although actually, once you start to learn their backgrounds, you're kind of glad that you haven't met them because some of them have some unsavory backgrounds. But Dmitry Firtash had been indicted for corruption. Now, he says it's a bogus case, but he's still indicted 8-9 years later. He's still a fugitive from the law. He's still fighting extradition to the United States. Not a few months after the Biden-Obama Justice Department indicted this guy, Hunter Biden's at the other end of this transaction, reaching out to Dmitry Firtash's people saying, I might be able to get you unindicted by my dad's Justice Department if you pay me $5 million. Now just think about that. He's undoing the very indictment his father's administration claimed. Now, fortunately for the Justice Department, Hunter Biden was never very good at things, and so they didn't get it done. But there he is shaking down an indicted foreign figure and with the promise that maybe he could make this indictment that his father levied go away. These are extraordinarily audacious efforts at not only influence peddling, but really, I think most Americans would say that's corrupt behavior. That's not what we do in America, selling our best wares to China, trying to unindict people who the government in the United States thought was corrupt. But that was Hunter Biden's core business model.
And things I never thought would happen in the United States, deeming half the country as potential domestic terrorists, as the biggest threat since the American Revolution. A president telling the people that his patience is wearing thin. But John, there's something that's bothering me even more. It's about the media and the lack of curiosity that they have. Everyone hang tight. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back, John. And I think one of the most important things that really disturbs me is you look at the Biden family business and everything they've done, and then you look at something like Watergate and how the media was, where they were ferocious in Watergate. Now, in Watergate, and I'm not condoning what took place, but you had a couple of Republican operatives break into Democrat National Committee headquarters and steal an election playbook. Here, you have the Biden family getting rich off the taxpayers' back, hooking up with some of the most authoritarian governments out there, and the wholesale selling out of America. Is there any real comparison, and what has changed in our society and our media that seems like no one cares?
Well, you look at the founding of this country, and I think that Our founding fathers, in all of their wisdom, believed that a free and fair media was important to democracy, important to the constitutional republic that they gave birth to. And today, our media is neither fair nor is it free. It is too much under the thumb of the Washington elites. The main news organizations in America spend all of their time hobnobbing with the globalists, with the big state, deep state actors, and they've become inseparable from them. That's why stories like Russia collusion could so easily be sold when they were obviously wrong. I mean, listen, when I first heard the story of Russia collusion, I'm a reporter like, holy cow, if this is true, if Donald Trump is in bed with Russia, this is the story of a century. And then I would go to the FBI and the FBI would go, nah, no truth to it. No there, like Pete Strzok wrote in his own text messages. And I stopped reporting it because my reporting, and I mean, I did a lot of reporting, I kept hearing it's not true. It's not there. It's not. It's a political stunt by Hillary Clinton. And yet I watched for 2.5 years after I was told that by senior FBI officials, the media saying they had sources in the FBI who were telling them it was true. It can't be. The FBI told me time and again that it wasn't true. And by the way, their account to me turned out to be the right account. They never had any evidence, as John Durham ultimately proved. But where were those other sources? Who were those sources? How could they be telling me one thing and telling the other media another thing? I think there is a serious lack of separation, a serious lack of freedom and independence and neutrality that's lacking now from the legacy media and the people they cover. And it's that lack of separation that makes the once fair and free press now to be sometimes harmful to the United States American people because they impose false narratives that take us 2 and 3 years to unravel. And then we all feel burned as Americans, like, I thought that was true, and now it's not. What are you telling me? I think that cycle has really harmed American politics. It's become divisive. Again, I think journalism, when practiced well, can have an enormous benefit, but it hasn't been practiced well in the last 6 to 8 years by most of the legacy actors in the media. Now, there are a lot of places where it is getting practiced well. And, you look at what Matt Taibbi's done. Even though he leans to the left by his own acknowledgement, he's done some really good reporting, or Glenn Greenwald or Schnellenberger and other people. Journalism practiced well can still have a profound effect on this country the way our founding fathers intended, but too much of the legacy media, because they're under the thumb of the people they cover, because they're aligned intellectually, because they've abandoned neutrality and fairness, they have actually disturbed the public in ways that I would never have imagined when I got into this profession in the early 1980s. What
concerns me is the absolute corruption. I mean, you see the New York Times winning a Pulitzer based on its Russia reporting, even though they were wrong about everything. Then people like yourself or Miranda Devine and Molly Hemingway get routinely ignored. And it extends outwards beyond our media. It's like almost every institution has been hijacked by ideological zealots. Now, when it comes to going forward, what are some of the things that you're looking into for the upcoming election? Because we're already seeing it. We're already seeing the government interference.
The narratives are being laid right
elections.
Now. The narratives are being laid right now. That's why this weekend, the comments of President Trump were misinterpreted, because they're trying to lay a narrative that if he doesn't win and get his way, he'll create an insurrection. By the way, he's never been charged with insurrection. It's important because it keeps getting used. I see AP still call the Capitol riot an insurrection, but I don't see the president been charged with insurrection. So it's kind of confusing.
And over 1,200 people have been arrested. No one charged with insurrection there either.
No insurrection. So it is a real problem. And I think that, I think the most important thing that we've learned in 4 years is that we're not hostage to the mainstream media anymore. We're not hostage to the legacy media. That facts stick no matter where they come from. And increasingly, the American public has become less reliant on the New York Times. Listen, they may go to the New York Times and MSNBC because they want their biases to be confirmed. And if that's the case, then it's entertainment. It's not news, right? It's just making me feel good about my beliefs. But if you're looking for real facts, I think most Americans realize that they're not been getting them the last 4, 5, 6, 8 years from the mainstream media. So being able to keep injecting truth and facts into these new channels is actually having a profound effect. That's why the numbers went up so high on Joe Biden and corruption, because people got the facts around the media. The key to the 2024 election is to keep firing facts into the center of the American conscience. The American people are far smarter than the Democratic media and their allies in government think. They actually think the American people are stupid. And that's going to be their greatest, at the end of the day, their greatest Achilles heel. They have miscalculated the wisdom and the depth of knowledge that Americans actually have. We're all busy. We're trying to make ends meet. Maybe we're working 2 or 3 jobs because the Biden economy is taking a bite out of our wallet, but we're not stupid. And I think the American media has assumed that the way for those of us who want Americans to make up their own minds with facts is flood the zone with facts. It actually works. It's how we turned Russia collusion around, how we turned January 6th around, how we turned the Biden corruption story around. Keep putting facts into the public and trust the American people. They're going to get it right.
And I have one final question, because you understand these people better than I do. You've been around them for a long time.
Sadly, yes, I have.
But when it comes to them, do they not realize they despise Trump so much, but yet they're directly responsible for being the ones that elevate him, right? So we see with the overzealous prosecutions, Trump's numbers go up. We see with the constant, he's the next Mussolini, the next Hitler, his numbers go up. Now we're going to see with the bloodbath comment, where it's so easy for every American, no matter how, I saw the most biased Americans that I interact with were like, yeah, he didn't really say bloodbath in the way the media is portraying it. Yeah. Does the media not realize that they don't want him to become president, yet everything they're doing is helping him to become the next president?
I have said this to many of my colleagues that I used to work with at the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Associated Press. Remember that little sticker that used to show up on the gas station during the original spike in gas prices when Joe Biden in there?
I did that.
Joe Biden pointing up. Yeah, I did that. I think on November 6th, if Donald Trump wins, then mainstream media could have their own version of that sticker and said, I did that. I made that possible. I kept torturing the American public about this guy so much they decided to elect him because they realize we've been obsessed with a storyline that often isn't true. I think that that's going to be the great awakening for the media. We'll have to get that new sticker. Maybe if
you're going to have to trademark
Trump
that
47,
right away, I might steal that idea from you.
I did that. That's the amazing thing. And that's why the media has always been tasked with staying neutral. Don't get out of your pocket. Don't try to sway the electorate. Just give them the facts. They may have, in their effort to sway the media, actually created the very reality that they claimed that they were trying to avoid.
Yeah, it reminds me of both Democrats and Republicans. I mean, they opened the door for a person like Trump to come into play. And if they just did their jobs and were honest to the American people, they could have had it different. But they're not, and they have their own intent. They want to keep the status quo in a lot of ways. And then you have others that are just extremely ambitious with power. But we have people like you, journalists like you, that actually do report facts. Everyone needs to check out Just the News. I'm going to have links up at the website for PASreport.com. You can check out Just the News. John, always a pleasure to talk to you.
It's a great honor to be with you. I always enjoy your show so much.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at P.A.S. Report.